I'm just going to hit the record button. Cool. We'll give everyone like 1 minute before I pass it
Mm.
over to Claire and start properly, if that's okay, just for some more
Mhm.
people to join. But yeah, welcome everyone. My name's Leo. For those of you that we haven't met, I'm one of the co-founders here at Nexus, and we've got Claire, who's my co-founder, and Andy and Jack and Gemma, who we work closely with. I'll let them do their intros in a second. When a webinar starts at 30 past, you got to give it 1 or 2 minutes properly. So
Mhm.
yeah, thanks for joining. Really what we want to do at Nexus is support other founders on their journey, just because we had such a hard time getting things off the ground the first couple of years. We wasted a lot of money, learned a lot of lessons, made a lot of mistakes that ultimately could have cost us our startup, like very nearly just called it a day. And that's a shame in hindsight, knowing what we know now and how they could have been avoided. So considering there is such an important intersection between your health, which obviously is what we're about, we're building health tech, and fundraising and building a startup often don't always align with being healthy. They're not always good for you in terms of your
Mhm.
stress, your habits. So we just want to kind of have a branch of what we're doing being about supporting other founders to hopefully, yeah, not make the same mistakes we did and hopefully support their health along the way with educations, lessons, and community, etc. So, um, with that being said, I think yeah, we're past half past. Looks like quite a few people have joined. So, yeah, I'll pass it over to you, Claire, if that's okay.
Sure, thanks, Leo. Hi, everyone. I'm one of the co-founders at Nexus. I'm going to be interrogating Gemma, Andy, and Jack today. Before we start, so they're going to do their introductions. Could you maybe stick your introductions in the chat so we can see what sector you're working in, what phase of your journey you're on? Are you fundraising? Are you hiring? And the other thing is, whilst the guys are speaking, if you could just put yourself on mute so we don't have too much background noise, that'd be really helpful as well. So let's start with some introductions. Andy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Background wise, I'm a clinical scientist. I specialized in oncology, and actually, a specialism within that was women's health, gynecological oncology. Then I went to work for a Medtech company in sales, ended up running the company, ended up selling the company. So that was my first exit. And I did that a couple of times. More recently, I founded a diagnostics company about 6 months before lockdown started. So major success. We kept it going and exited, or did a Series A. And I've been part of about 60 plus M&As. So I know a lot about small companies and large companies in the acquisition process. And more recently, I became a recruiter. So sorry about that, everybody, but I know a lot about hiring. I know a lot about restructuring. I'm not a classical recruiter, and I hope that adds a lot of value to the team and everybody in this community.
Thanks, Andy. Gemma.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Gemma. My background is in commercial sales. So previously I was working in pharmaceutical advertising for quite a few years. I then moved into the programmatic side of things from a health tech perspective in 2017. I've owned three companies, I've exited two of them. And then a couple of years ago, I decided to move more into a mission-led social impact space after joining an accelerator around mental health, which was quite a big shift for me. So my current mission now really revolves around supporting companies with health tech innovations, specifically empowering women, female founders, high functioning women to really kind of step into their power, I suppose, lead more authentic, purpose driven businesses. And yeah, so just very excited to be working with Leo and the team. So I'm a commercial advisor for Nexus. I'm also an angel investor for Nexus as well.
Thanks, Gemma. And Jack.
Cheers, Claire. Nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Jack Baeza. I started my career in recruitment, working for sort of big multinationals across Europe, hiring in software engineers. A lot of the lessons that I learned from that, and just realizing that health and in particularly the workplace was very, very broken, led to part of the reason why me and Leo founded Nexus about 3 years ago now. Scary to say. 2 years on the journey for various reasons. One of them being that Clare and the other co-founders we brought on were much more suited to build a health tech company. I passed the reins over to the team that are doing an amazing job now, and decided to step on the other side of the table and join Vested. So rather than raising funds myself, I now support founders and early stage founders mainly raise funds, but also leverage conditional equity. So by that I mean you're setting up co-founding teams, hiring your teams, getting advisors, and everything in between. So yeah, hopefully I can share some insights today and help you guys along your journey.
Great, thanks, Jack. So we all get a lot of advice as founders. Some of it's useful, some of it's not. Question to all of you. What's one piece of advice you received early in your journey that turned out to be terrible advice? Andy, let's go to you first.
Yeah, it's a funny one because most people ask you what's the best advice. So I like this one. It's much better. Definitely, from my point of view, someone said to me, stick to the focus, don't trust your gut, don't get carried away. And I think that's really wrong. I think you've got a gut feeling for a lot of reasons, and it's generally right. Validate it for sure, but don't ignore it to the point where you're contradicting everything you built the company on. It's just crazy. So yeah, trust your gut. Don't follow that focus idea.
Good advice. Gemma.
Yeah, for me, it was that phrase that I heard a couple of times, to basically build it and they will come. So particularly in your first venture, very excited to have an idea and you just want to get it out there, right? You just want the world to know about it, and you invest everything into the product. But I found it's so important to always be thinking about the marketing, the product market fit at the same time. So you absolutely have to have that ready, and be building that alongside the product at the same time. And we were talking before this call about co-creation. So really involving your user in the experience of building your product so they feel part of it. And I know Nexus, we're going to be doing some focus groups, right? So looking at how we're going to develop the product over time so it really fits those customer needs. So I think for me, on my journey, and I got a bit better at this by the third one, but certainly the first one, we just wanted to get the idea out there. We knew there was a bit of proof of concept, but we hadn't really nailed the product market fit. So we built the product, but it wasn't quite ready. And then we had to backtrack a lot, and it caused quite a lot of pain. So really start to think about that sales and marketing from the start, get your proof of concept, get some early traction, and build both at the same time.
Great advice. Jack, what's some terrible advice that you received?
Which answers this one slightly differently. But I think one of the things that as a first-time founder is that everyone is willing to give advice. Everyone wants to give their advice, tell the lessons they've learned, and I think that's absolutely critical as a first-time founder. Ask the questions, ask people that have done it before, get the answers from the experts and that have been where you are. But I think there comes a point where you've got enough advice, and I think you need to have some integrity and just try and go forward with that advice and trust in your ability and the knowledge that you've built to know what that first step is. And if that first step doesn't work, you fail and you try again. But I think sometimes there's a point where there's so much advice that you never quite make the action because you get confused. And I remember in my own journey, it was taking on so much advice that I lost actually what our core mission was, what we were trying to achieve because of all this sometimes contradiction of advice. And it gets to a point where trust your instincts, trust your skill set, and move forward.
Great, thanks, Jack.
So if I can just add to that as well, Claire, real quick. So when we had a quick chat before the webinar, Andy, you made your point as well about trusting your gut, and Jack, you've just reflected on that too. I also want to add to that, it's so important. That feeling that you have as a founder, whether you kind of know you're on the right track or not, or something might need to change. And you do get advice from all different angles. Even I was doing it 2 seconds ago, right, in answer to that question. But that feeling that you get, how you feel like in your body, and that emotional feeling about what you're building, definitely trust it, even if everything around you sometimes seems to be saying the opposite. you do know you have to trust yourself, and it might feel like taking a risk sometimes because there's all these kind of protocols and other people have done it this way, and you might doubt yourself. But honestly, that's what being an entrepreneur is as well, being able to trust yourself. So really, really listen, to your body as well, not just your mind. And that's quite difficult to do when you're in the day to day, you're working like 20-hour days or whatever, which is why it's really important to kind of take time out from all of that noise and just kind of sit with yourself and see what comes up. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, you often have some of your best ideas and sort of light bulb moments when you actually step away from it, don't you? Yeah. So Gemma, having been on this journey several times, how, as a founder, do you know when you're actually ready to start raising investment? And what are the biggest trends shaping fundraising right now?
Okay, so I think from my experience, you're ready when you feel really confident that you can communicate a few things to your investors very concisely, very succinctly. So you have to be able to have your elevator pitch and state very quickly and cleanly your vision and your mission, right? So your reason for being. When you're looking at pitch decks, your pitch needs to be nailed. You need to have your problem and solution slide, again, like very clear. So in the first 2 or 3 slides, investors can see exactly what the problem is, what the solution is, how your product is going to deliver on that, and what the traction is. And once you get past those first 4, you're going to have a nice way in with investors. The third thing I mentioned earlier is you'll know you're ready when you've got that product market fit. And you can demonstrate that when you can clearly articulate what your USP is and how you can talk about how you compare and differentiate between competitors. So this comes up all of the time. You'll speak to an investor and they'll immediately think of your competitors. Sometimes it's good to be associated with that, especially if they're very successful, but you also need to show your niche and your USP. Early traction is ideal. It will make your conversations with investors so much easier, and you'll feel so much more prepared. So if you have that, then yeah, just get out and start speaking to people. And we'll talk about it a bit more, I think, later on. It's one of the points about having the right team. So choosing the right co-founders and having a team around you that can deliver and they're all aligned with the mission. So you're ready to get in front of investors. You're all kind of on the same page. And you feel confident that, when you get that first investor call and intro, you can really nail it and you're all aligned. So that was probably answer the first question. The second one, kind of trends in the industries right now. So, my background experience is mainly in health tech, but obviously I'm moving a bit more into femtech right now. So I'd probably say what I'm noticing speaking to investors is investments that are starting to become a little bit more sustainable. I mean, I'm speaking to a lot of impact investors anyway. That's part of our strategy. But there seems to be less big ticket deals and more focus on investors wanting to put money into earlier stages of the startup. So at inception, so innovative startups at a very early stage. And also those that can demonstrate that there's a sustainable long-term solution. And in terms of femtech, I mean, wearables is a massive area. Anything looking at prediction, prevention, early diagnostics. I think I jotted down by 2030, investment in femtech is going to be looking at 1.1 trillion, which is absolutely huge. There's a lot of talk around menopause at the moment, non-hormonal solutions around menopause. There's a lot of apps out there around fertility, and periods and all of women's complex health symptoms, but 99% of them, including the femtech unicorns that we're probably all familiar with, they are looking at symptoms. They're not dealing with the root cause of problems. So they're not offering sustainable solutions for the complex health symptoms that women are facing. And that is a huge opportunity. So I think in the sector, there's a lot of market consolidation that we can expect to see happening. There's a massive need to integrate a lot of the apps and the platforms that are out there to make it easier for women all in one place. And I think there's going to be a lot of investment in that area. Outside of that, maybe just to summarize that, the kind of lifetime value for investors when they're investing. So from a fundraising perspective, that sustainability we talked about, but also from the user perspective, from a customer perspective. The market is wanting to see now, how can these siloed options be integrated in a central place to make people's lives, women's lives particularly, in the case of femtech, easier and simpler. So that's kind of what we're seeing in the sector, and a bit more around inclusivity and accessibility. Just to touch on AI as well, obviously massive investment still in AI and machine learning, and linking that with personalization, intervention, predictive modeling, all those kind of things, and early diagnostics, which I think I mentioned. So that's my kind of feedback on how I see the femtech sector currently.
What's your take on, people talk about how little funding goes to female-led companies. What's your take on that within the femtech space? Because we're aware of funds who only want to invest in female funds.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. So I'm speaking to lots of investors at the moment, and the majority, I would say 90% of them that are being responsive are from women, or they are from organizations that have a remit to specifically invest in female founders. So there's a really big opportunity there. There is a lot of money going into that space. However, when you think that women make up 50% of the population, all investors should be looking at femtech solutions, right? So there's an argument there. So depending on investors that I'm speaking to in any particular moment, I will go in with a slightly different angle, but there is more money going into that femtech space. And yeah, my thoughts on that. I mean, it's a long time coming, and we're still a long way away from bridging that gender funding gap. And I think that the more support from the kind of male community of investors as well, and what Leo and Jack have built. I know they get asked sometimes, why are you building a product for women when you're men, and that kind of thing. But look, women are half the population, and we deserve to have more investment. And I think that there's a lot of noise around that at the moment, and it's a big area to tap into.
Yeah,
good to see. Yeah,
thanks. Andy, investors often say they invest in the people more than the products. So what do investors, in your experience, really look for in that founding team?
Well, I think, first of all, look at the question and ask, why do investors invest in people more than products? Very rarely does a startup company have the same product 2 years later, after it started. So, if you invest in the product, undoubtedly you're going to be wrong. But if you invest in the people and they're agile and they've got great ideas and they can make it work, then that's what they're really looking for. And that's about chemistry, and that's about, not just strategies and great presentations. So I think what they generally look for, I think, is passion, is being humble and being able to take criticism and do something with it. I was part of a team that had, we focused on getting 49 products, and actually when we went to raise again, everybody told us we needed 2 products, and we didn't want to hear that. And that was really hard. So I think they want people who can listen to the advice they have, but also challenge them. They want specialists, but also people who can be generalists. There is no room to hide when there's 4 of you or 3 of you and things need to get done. And unfortunately, you may not be able to afford the team you start with. You may have to let people go and do things yourself. But ultimately, I always say you want people who would do that job, even if they won the lottery. Would they come back in and finish founding this company and getting it off the ground? Would you still do it for 0? Would you still do it if you had £1 billion? Yeah, I would. Fractional people is a great way to afford people at the moment. So everybody, as good people have got a side hustle they can go to. Challenge them if you come across that and say, like, is that side hustle going to get in the way? Because trust me, your investors will challenge that too, and they'll probably know about that, and they'll have done the same themselves. Full-time roles are great, but make sure 100% you can afford them. 100%. Like, if you can't, let's say, be straight with people, and and I think investors love that. Investors love the fact that, say, we've got somebody here but they can take their work down if we want them full time. And talk to your investors, like, actually ask them what they want. Don't guess at what they might want. Sometimes they've got things that you can tap into, like, a legal person or something. And if you don't understand the stuff in between, if you've got a person who's been a paralegal in the past, for example, and they can get the best out of this legal person that your investor's got, that's great. So think about the segues between the team you're building and the investors. And often your investors are willing to give people up and resources up for free. But if you don't know what to do with them, they're not going to hold your hands to help you to do that. So specialism plus some level of generalism, passion, fractional if you can do it without a distracting side hustle, and look for that connection to something the investors have got already.
Sounds great. Gemma and Jack, do you have anything to add to that?
Just adding on to what the guys were saying, recently Vested hosted a pitch competition in Tide a couple of weeks ago now. And on the run up to that, I spoke to too many investors, probably over 200 or 250 investors over the last sort of 4 months. And time again, the feedback that we got, especially when we were going through pitch decks or they were giving feedback to all the applicants that they were going through, is touching on the point that Andy just said about, I think as a founder, you're so passionate about your product, right? And you want to shout about it, you want to say how good it is, how, it's going to be revolutionary, all sort of stuff, which is obviously fantastic. And the bottom line, that is going to be the thing that makes the money in the long run. However, at the start, things change, but also that if you're not a team, an investor said, a good team could make an average product work, but a bad team would make an amazing product fail, right? And I think that speak the language of the investors. They're looking at team, market opportunity, and traction. They're the three main things they're looking for. If you tick those boxes, then you can open up a conversation about product. But until those boxes are ticked, it's very hard to get in front of the investors. So I think create your resources or your outreach, or however you're going to reach out to these investors, and speak their language rather than the things that you think you want to share. Think about the things that they want to hear from you, and push that first. Because if your team page is on the last page, but you've got two founders that have exited £300 million companies or whatever, they might not get to the 10th page before they've switched off because they haven't seen those signs early on. So push it to the front and just make that really clear is what I would round up on.
Great. So Jack, for a startup, it's quite hard to compete with the big companies in terms of attracting talent. So what's the best way to find and retain those great people?
Yeah, good question. I think the introduction of AI and automation has made this a lot easier, and people can do way more with their time now if they're using their time efficiently. And I think that's part of the reason where there's been a big push in fractional help, because whereas before a lot of the stuff you needed to do manually, you can now automate that and focus on the things that a human really needs to do. So I think leveraging that, but also being able to potentially offer equity packages. You might not have the money early on to bring in a fractional or a full-time person, but can you find a handful of people that believe in the mission as much as you do, that are willing to give you some of their time in return for ensuring that they can help build out this vision with you? Because I think that doing that shows investors that you can attract a team, you can compete with people and bring those people on board, and you're going to need that skill down the line when you're trying to hire a team, even for money. To get the best people, you need to have that talent to attract those people, right? And one of the other things that I learned on my journey, that now I'm helping other people sort of avoid, is that when you're giving equity, I think it's you feel like there's a bit of a power imbalance. You feel like you're gifting someone, or they're doing you a favor for working for nothing. But I think that you need to look at equity like cash. Like investors are going to look at it like hard money on the cap table. I think that founders realize that a little bit too late, and they might be too generous with giving away equity, or not think of it as having monetary value. And I think that because of that, they work on trust. And I think that there needs to be a level of trust, but also I think investors will want to see this, but also founders, I think, to protect yourself, is creating conditionality in the agreements that you offer to these team members that can come on. So what I mean by that is that you can give, let's say, 1% of equity that I want to give to Gemma. There's two options. I could just give it to Gemma and hope that she does what that she's saying she's going to do, and hope that we understand each other. Or I could put in some some rules around that conditionality that would say, okay, Gemma will get 0.5% over the next 2 years, and blending some milestones to make sure that we are keeping ourselves accountable, but also the company accountable, so that if those things aren't met, that we can retrieve that equity. Because otherwise, having holes in your cap table, especially when you're going to investment, can be a make or break. So yeah, I would say try and get people on the vision with you. Just because you're not revenue generating yet, you can bring people on in other ways, and just making sure that, I think that alongside bringing them on with equity, that's one of the powers of that is that shared vision. So ensuring that everyone on that early journey is shared in the mission and is all going towards that North Star, I think is very important.
Yeah, that's great advice. What about establishing benchmarks for salary and equity packages in general? Because obviously in a startup, you can't afford to pay market rate, especially in a digital tech startup, because those salaries are quite high. So what's your view and Andy's view on what those benchmarks look like?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think there's a lot of resources out there to look at averages, and I know the UK and Europe is very different to America. But I think that there's no right or wrong answer. I think you need to have hard conversations with your founding team. Be realistic, but also that for instance, I might be living at home in my parents' spare room and eating pot noodles every day, and I have zero outgoings other than their phone bill maybe. But the other co-founder might be a mum of two and have a mortgage and all these other things. So I think ensure that it's realistic, but also have that hard conversation. Like, what is the minimum that you need to be able to create this? Make this viable, because if you're not paying yourself enough, then the business isn't going to get anywhere, because you're going to be stressed about money. Are you paying your bills and all this sort of stuff? And that isn't a headspace that you really want to be in to be able to create a company that's going to potentially change the world. So I think it's a mix between looking at the resources out there and understanding what is the averages and trying to get as close to those as possible, but also having that hard conversation with what are your real needs as a founder, and I think having those two sides of the coins, you're going to land a good spot.
Right.
Yeah, and I think just it's not straightforward. Cash and the runway and things are not straightforward, and if you're speaking to the right people, there can be benchmarks, but I think, I often have the conversation with people. If they're excited about the business, if they were excited, for example, about working with Nexus, I'd say, how excited are you about this? What can you survive on? And where do you need to be comfortable? And how long until you need to be back to that comfortable position? And a lot of people have, like Jack said, different reasons. They might have exited, they might have a lump of cash, but they want to do something exciting now and they're willing to take the hit. That's not really easy to put out there on LinkedIn as a number of it, as a salary. So I think it's really about a chat with them about the long-term relationship, and it's not good to have founders who just want to be around for a year.
Yeah. Speaking about hiring people, what are the biggest hiring mistakes that startups make, and when does it make sense to bring in somebody like yourself rather than trying to do it yourself?
Yeah, I mean, when answering a question like this, it's most people think, oh well, of course Andy's going to say bring you in at the start and pay you a fortune, but that's not true. I mean, it's really easy to hire yourself. LinkedIn, makes that easier for you. But like any other specialist role, I think it's really dangerous to think you can do everything yourself in the amount of time you've got. It's really dangerous to think that you won't get attached or like somebody's personality too much and make the wrong decision. And I think, along that journey of hiring, it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of conversations. And generally, the mistake I see people make is that they don't have enough time, and they forget that these people who are on the market, if they're good, have other people looking for them as well. And if you're not there in time, they will be mercenary and say, look, I've got family too. I've took another job. I'm sorry. and I didn't have to let you know. And, I do a lot of work in the background, and so do other recruiters, to make sure that there's a lot of touch points. So when to do it, I think when it's not absolutely obvious and very easy and you haven't got tons of time on your hands, that's when to do it. And also when you're looking for specifically something like a co-founder, like a CTO, that is not in your comfort area, where you might be asking questions where you think, I've just downloaded this set of questions and I don't really know what they mean. I think, why use that recruiter then? It's like getting a PA. If you get the right recruiter, you're getting someone who's going to push you, who's going to help you as much as you can help them. It costs money, of course, it costs money, but how much is it costing you not having a person in that role? And they should be making money for you or saving you money or whatever. So I always think, easy benchmark to say it costs between 10 and 20% of the first year salary of a person. But if you've got a good relationship with the recruiter, I think then talk to them about your financial constraints and what the long-term relationship is. And good recruiters probably want to have a relationship with you, a bit like a lawyer, and say, you don't need me all the time, but you need me some of the time. And when you do need me, I'd like you to come to me always, and like to know that I'm your partner. And with that goes that little question about, like, okay, big or small agency. Big agency, big power, maybe lesser relationship, a bit like when you take your car to the garage. Big company probably doesn't care, little company probably cares, but you've got to have a much more tight relationship with them. And with that, you can get other services. I know people have asked me before, like, can you help with the interview process? Absolutely, I can. What should we do? Advice. Leo asked me, for example, what do we do? We don't have an office, so where do we interview people? What's the best thing do you think you should do? And I always say, what do you feel comfortable with? What about like 30-minute speed dating calls with people, then an interview, and then a final face-to-face somewhere? Don't need to have an office. Most people don't have an office now. So I think that the time to do it is when you think this is a crucial hire. I've got a real constraint, which I'm going to struggle to get somebody in for. And if I don't have this person in 6 to 10 weeks, then I've got a real difficulty, because I'm trying to pitch for money and I've got a space there on the founded team. And if I think that's going to take me 4 weeks of solid work, what's happening to the rest of the business whilst I don't work for 4 weeks?
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's always so much to do, isn't it? So it's just knowing, not just with recruitment, but which bits can you outsource to people who are more expert at that than you are. Thinking about all of the things that a founder has on their plate, we know that building a business is really hard, otherwise everyone would be doing it. We hear a lot about burnout. So Gemma, how do you balance your own health and well-being with the needs of your businesses, as you've been through this process several times?
Honestly, not very well, or not well enough. I'm learning to be a little bit better, but I've definitely experienced burnout, a couple of times throughout the years, especially after having my daughter as well. Actually sold my first business whilst I was kind of going through that, and it was very, very difficult to make time for myself during that time. But kind of having that experience, when you do reach that burnout, you realize that actually you have quite a big responsibility as a founder, and you can feel quite selfish wanting to put yourself first, or there's just not enough time. But if you're trying to build something sustainable, you absolutely have to. So for me, somebody speaking to me in that way to say, you have to take care of yourself, otherwise you're not going to be able to help other people, was the thing that resonated. And then I've started to, put myself first a little bit more. I think a really important thing is setting boundaries. That's something that I find incredibly difficult. I want to say yes to most things. If I see an opportunity, or if there's someone that I can support, I want to kind of jump in head first. And then often that comes at the detriment to myself. And then you kind of don't end up doing a good job for anyone. So setting some boundaries, having focused time, planning in actual time when you're around your inner circle of people, not talking about the business. Eventually, you probably will end up talking about the business because you live and breathe it. But having that group of friends that you can kind of just go out and wind down with and talk about other things, and kind of just give your mind a little bit of a break is so, so important. I can sit here and say you need to go to the gym every day and you need to do all of these things, but it's almost impossible. We know that as a founder, but that would be a really big thing I would implore founders to do. Mark time in with your friends, with your trusted inner circle, not talking about the business. So that boundaries, and I think, this is probably getting a bit deep now, but because as founders we're also emotionally connected to our businesses and what we're building, when you're fundraising, it's very, very difficult not to take any feedback or criticism personally. So you have to find a way to detach a little bit, because it does feel like your baby, or like your marriage or something like that. When you have your company, it's something you're building. You have to find a way to detach and not take it personally, and that's something I struggled with a little bit as well. So that's more about kind of reflecting and not reacting. So in some instances where you are fundraising and there's often a lot of pressure, you need the money to come in like quite soon. It's important, if you find yourself in a situation where you feel like you're going to answer or respond from an emotional perspective, to just take a step back. It's okay to go away and say, can I reflect on that for a little bit and come back to you? So having that little bit of detachment, definitely be emotionally invested, but know when to detach a little bit, will save you a lot of grief in the long term. I've been on calls when you need to get the money in quite quickly and you might say something without thinking it through, and then it's very difficult to backtrack from that. But these things are a lot easier when you cultivate that space, right? So having that inner circle, taking that little bit of time out. And for me, I think compartmentalizing, so good for your mental health. Again, that's not something I do very well, because when you're a founder, particularly in the early stages, you're doing everything. You got to wear so many different hats, and things come up that you have to deal with straight away. But again, just slowing down a little bit, taking a breath. If you're into breath work and things like that, like that's been like a game changer for me. It can honestly make such a difference, and it's something that you can do like in your daily schedule. Just take that breath, take that step back, and be like, okay, I'm going to focus on this task 100% for the next hour. Then I'm going to have a cup of tea or something, or take a little break, and then I'm going to focus on this. So yeah, that's kind of how I try to take care of my mental health. It's difficult to do sustainably, but you can feel it when you don't, and things can become overwhelming very quickly. And yeah, if you see yourself as being responsible, as a founder, for me as a parent as well, then that's the kind of way to put yourself first. If you find it difficult and think it's selfish, or I'll do it later, or you kind of have to do it to build something sustainable and show up for yourself and
It's
others.
like the bring your own gas mask on first thing, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, or on the aeroplane, right? Where
Yeah.
So very difficult to do. But yeah, I'd say a lot of founders probably need to burn out once to experience it, and then I'm not saying they should, but sadly that often happens, and then they kind of put a plan in place. But there are preventative measures you can do that don't take up too much time and take you away from the business too much.
Yeah.
Okay, something to add to that really quick, that's okay, Claire. As I saw a post this morning, which I think put it really well, is that as a human being, but also as a founder, there's so many plates to juggle, and unfortunately, we always try to spin all of them. Family, health, friends, whatever that. Being a founder, all of those things are constantly trying to juggle, and I think that this analogy was quite nice, that you've got 4 stoves and you can't always be cooking all things at the same time. Sometimes you're gonna have to put something later while you're working on here, and that might have to give. So if you are going through a point where you've realized you might be a bit of rubbish with your family or your friends, and it's about addressing that rather than feeling bad, say, the people that really care about you, if you have an honest conversation, say, look, right now I am at my wit's end, I have no time to do this, and I feel so guilty about how I am with you, but please bear with me. The people that are true friends, that are true family, will stick by. And I think that not beating yourself up and being a little bit compassionate is a really, really key to that. Because otherwise, when you're trying to do everything at the same time, you're always going to be setting yourself up for failure. And I think that's one of the key things, is to understand what your capacity is, and just be honest and open about it with everyone involved.
Yeah, that's such good
I have a friend who's built a very successful business, and she often does that. And as a friend, it's much appreciated. Obviously, we'd like to spend more time, but we appreciate that she's acknowledged it, and we understand the pressure she's under. So that's a really interesting post that you shared. Thank you.
Also, Claire, just to add to that, I would definitely recommend, if it's achievable, to get a coach. So to have someone outside of the business that's trained in supporting, professionals building up businesses, and you have that check-in, a regular check-in with them, where you kind of use that time to either vent and empty your head, or you get out all the feelings you're talking about then, Jack, right? If you're not being there for your friends or your family, you start beating yourself up, and like everything can start to come down. But to have that sounding board, somebody independent who is skilled in working with, founders and people building companies, and they are out there. I have people I can recommend if anyone's interested, but that can work with your energy levels as well. So I've got a coach at the moment, and he's working with me in my energy levels to look at what times I can be most creative, the times when I need to deal with the crappy, boring admin stuff, and then obviously working with you guys with what Nexus are doing with your app, understanding what, when you're most capable of achieving certain things, when you could be at your optimum performance. So that whole kind of coaching arena from a physical, holistic point of view is really important. And I think if founders could invest a bit of time in that, and that's investing in yourself, right? I found it life-changing. And I've been quite lucky because my best friend, actually, she started her startup journey before me, probably about 4 years earlier. I left the corporate world a little bit after her. And she's now a professional coach. And she kind of used me as a guinea pig a little bit for a few times. And I don't know where I would be without that, because sometimes you just need to get everything off your chest. And you don't want to do that with family and friends. You don't want to do that with your business partners or your co-founders. You don't necessarily want your team to see how stressed you are. There's a thin line between being authentic, but also, being able to lead and look after yourself. And having a coach has been life-changing for me. So that's something I would probably put, to the top in terms of mental well-being.
That whole yourself first so that you can invest in other people, isn't it?
Yeah.
100%. But also, if you don't, I if you've got that ability to invest, fantastic, and definitely use that. But some people that potentially don't, I think a good bit of advice is find someone that may be in your position you'd want to be in 10 or 20 years, and reach out to them. A lot of my first mentors were people that maybe I didn't have the ability to, but I'm just going to send them a message on LinkedIn and ask them. And you'll be surprised that people like to help if it makes them, makes them feel good and know what they want to give. So, send that message, and it might be a no, but after a few tries and find the right person, you'll find someone that is happy to give, be a sounding board every couple of weeks or whatever, and that does really, really help.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time. We've got one question in the chat that I think is worth addressing. So if you can stick around, great. If you've got any more questions, put them in the chat if you've got the time. Gemma, I think it's probably a good one for you. So Yasmin, who's unfortunately had to leave, but we'll get the recording. She wants to know if you've got any advice on how to demonstrate traction when you're still building the product, basically. So you've got some sign-ups, you've got some letters of intent, but you're getting the feedback that that's still not enough. So what is it that investors are really looking for there to make the jump?
Yeah, so I mean, in an ideal situation, you'd have some kind of pilot, particularly if you're looking at B2B, going to market and commercializing from a B2B perspective, having a sponsor or a pilot or a letter of intent from a brand that's, going to back you in your business. If you're not at that stage yet, then I think being able to demonstrate that there's a community of people, potential users that are going to buy your product, that can really get you a long way. So in the case of Nexus, for instance, you guys have, a huge community of thousands of women that are posting on LinkedIn, that are physically turning up to your lunches, and you are kind of marketing the company in that way. But that's also showing to investors the traction. You are basically building up that customers and that wait list and creating some buzz about what you're building, without actually having those early sales yet. So if you can get a kind of community building around your product and service and get people talking and getting it out there and investors can see that, I think that's a really good way to show some traction, without actually having early sales in.
To add to that, I think that it is very tough, and I think that especially the investment landscape right now is one of the toughest it's been for a little while, and I think that some people are a bit disillusioned that back in 2020, an idea on the back of a fag packet, and you could probably get some pre-seed investment, but times have changed, and investors are looking for traction. I think a lot of the time, if you are getting that feedback, ask them, what traction points do you want to see? And if there's a lot of the same answers, going back and answer that, then work towards them. And I think having like an email list of people where you can show the improvements week on week. So you're asking these questions, but you're also delivering on them. And every week or every 2 weeks, whatever cadence that works for you guys, is that showing how these things are moving and building that FOMO of investors. And one thing as well is that I think everyone has got a waiting list, which is great. It's definitely needed. But, are your waiting list potentially willing to pay for a month up front or 3 months up front? I think that investors sometimes, because there's so many waiting lists, they're a little bit desensitized to the word waiting list. But waiting list is very different to actually buying customers that have pre-ordered the product. So, look yourself what you've got and how you can optimize and work with what you've got, because there are some ways without having to spend money or understand people have got capacity restraints, so that you can bolster those traction points to make it even more impressive.
Thanks, Jack. Does anybody, I know we're running over time now, but if anyone's got any more questions, I think our panel are happy to stay around for a bit longer. So come off your mic, ask the question. Otherwise, we can wrap it up.
Hello.
Nope.
Hi. I've just got a question. As a founder coming from a background of 20 years experience in software development, I'm just starting to raise now for my HealthTech startup, resthealth.co.uk. And I was just wondering how you feel about cold introductions, where I'm a software developer. I've worked in a few startups on the development level, making the product, but I don't really have those connections to get warm introductions. And I was just wondering how you generally felt about making those cold introductions, and what the best approach would be to getting investors and talking to them, and making that kind of early traction on the investment journey, essentially.
I think a lot of I spoke to on this question a lot recently, so I'll have to pick this one up. So I think a lot of people in that same spot, and I think that first of all, potentially reach out to some of the people on LinkedIn you might know. You might be surprised when you ask, they might know someone that knows someone, and I think there's definitely try and go after that route a little bit more. But if it is a case of having to just approach from a cold, I think learn about them. There's a company called Scribe, which I think are a great company. They show you that they pull the company the info from company's house. So you'll see the investor, but you also see their most recent investment. And I think that investors are going to get thousands of messages in their inbox. Most of them are going to be cold, and they're going to be, templated or copy and paste or automated, whatever else. I think build an investment list of 50 to 100 people that are going to be the dream investors, but not just investors, but strategic partners that can add value to your business. And if when you're speaking to them, you're saying that, I can see you've invested in X, you've done this, which is why I think X. and just speak to, I think just speaking around that, personalizing it, understanding that you're actually speaking to them for a reason rather than just wanting them to bankroll your idea, and be a partner in this business rather than just an ATM. So I think the personalization in the US is a little bit different, where mass emailing might work a little bit better, but I think the UK it's more about creating that relationship and trying to bring them on that journey. So yeah, that would be my 2 pence on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I can add a little to that. I mean, as somebody who, I have a ritualized way I have to approach people all the time, and it is there's a lack of authenticity about that, but it has to be done. But then I think there's also the authentic approach, and I think now it's quite easy to see investors and see which people they're connected with, companies they're connected with. Connect with people at those companies and be genuine and say, I've got a really interesting product. I'd really like to talk to your investor, but they get 8 billion emails a day from AI bots, sending them a message. So could you help me with an introduction? I'd really like to, explain what I do to them, and people, a bit like the comment earlier about finding a coach, people do like to help. It's just that generally investors, even myself, if I put a job advert out there, I get 3,000 emails in a week. Like, I have to screen them. You have to screen them in some way, or else you just go under. So reach out, be discreet about it, ask people, and be genuine. Say, like, I am asking for you to help me get an introduction. Don't try and be like, any other thing. Be honest, because when you have that conversation, you say, oh, actually, really, I want to have an introduction. It's going to break down pretty easy, and then you've lost both ways to get in.
Absolutely. And it also, people, if you're positioning your company and the traction and everything else, and then that person makes an introduction, and that is a beneficial introduction, it makes them look good, right? So even if you might not know them as your best mates down the pub, but you're willing to show that, this is a company that's worth backing, they make the introduction, then everyone's winning. So don't be afraid to ask. But as Andy said, it makes sure that if you do ask, it's in an authentic way.
Definitely. Okay.
I think also as well, to ask you for that one thing, right? So often when you're approaching investors cold, you want them to look at your pitch deck, or you're asking for a call or 10 or 15 minutes or something. But if you specifically go in and ask for help and just ask for one intro to a specific person, that probably makes it a lot easier for them to respond to as well. So potentially from a time constraint, that could be a strategic way to do that.
Was that helpful, Nick?
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. That's great help.
Anybody have any other questions? Okay, let's wrap up then. I'm just going to ask every panel member, what one piece of advice would you give to the founders listening to this? Andy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think, it's a really old adage, but time is money. If you're rubbish at it, outsource it. And I'm not saying that from my own point of view. I'm saying that from investors love companies that hit deadlines. You will burn more money than you think you're going to burn. But if you go back to your investors and say, we hit every deadline, it just cost a little bit more money than we thought. I've had investors come back and say, great, how much more do you need? But if you say, we didn't get anything done, we've got loads of money left, they're like, well, okay, what's the point? We'll never get this product. So outsource it, hit your deadlines. That's my advice.
Right, Jack?
Two things that sort of relate to each other, but don't be afraid to ask for help and ask questions, and also make sure that you build a community. Being a founder, especially in this age where everyone's working from their spare bedroom, it can be quite lonely. So I think building a community of people that you can bounce off, that can support you, that you can guide you, I think it is vital. So yeah, make sure you find that community. Don't be afraid to ask, because if they're done in an authentic way, you'll be surprised at how many people want to help.
And Gemma?
For me, I think it would be that mental and emotional health aspect. It can be very, very stressful when you're fundraising, so much pressure. And yeah, to almost put that at the top of your list. So if you even have the time to write a to-do list, or you're going through your Slack or whatever, before you even open that in the morning, just do something, just do a little bit of self-care, even if you're meditating a bit over a cup of tea. Just take those moments throughout the day and create some rituals just to give you that space to breathe. I think that should be a priority.
Great. Okay. Thanks. A big thanks to the panel. Leo, did you want to say